Maggie Harris had always thought she'd found her one true love in Jack Thornton. Their connection had been undeniable, almost magical. Back when they were young, she was a bright and hopeful young woman, full of dreams, and Jack, with his strong cowboy spirit, seemed to be everything she ever wanted. They had met during one of those warm summer days when the air was thick with the scent of wildflowers, and the town was buzzing with the kind of energy that only youth could bring. Maggie had grown up in a small town nestled in the heart of the American West. It wasn't a place where people moved quickly. Most people stayed, grew old, and built families. It was the sort of place where everyone knew everyone's business, but also where a good story could be told under the stars, surrounded by the sounds of crickets and coyotes. Jack, though, was different. He wasn't from the town, but he'd always had a quiet presence, like the distant rumble of thunder before the storm. Jack had been raised with a strong sense of duty. He was a cowboy, through and through. But he had a secret that few knew: he wasn't just a cowboy. He had roots in something far older and deeper. His ancestors were Apache, a legacy he rarely spoke about. He had been raised in a household where hard work and perseverance were valued, where respect for the land and the people around you meant everything. The Apache way of life had taught him much about courage and survival, but it was a part of his life that Jack kept to himself. When Jack moved to the town, it was a quiet, unspoken decision. He had come to work, to live simply, and to start anew. Maggie had noticed him immediately. He wasn't like the other men in town. He didn't have the flashy smile or the easy confidence that others displayed. Instead, there was a quiet strength about him. His deep brown eyes held a kind of sadness, something Maggie couldn't quite place at first. Jack was the kind of man who would ride into town on his horse, the sun catching the dust rising behind him, and everyone would stop to look. They'd wonder where he had come from, and yet no one would ask. Maggie was no different. She had seen him around, helping with the cattle, working the land, or simply sitting by the fire with the other ranchers at the local gathering. But what had really caught her attention was the way he moved through the world calmly, with a sense of purpose that intrigued her. She often found herself watching him from a distance, wondering what thoughts were hidden behind that quiet demeanor. But it wasn't until the night of the town dance that everything changed. Maggie had never been one to shy away from attention. She was confident, fun-loving, and not afraid to speak her mind. But on the night of the dance, something was different. As the music played and the laughter filled the air, Maggie felt a pull in her chest, an invisible force that seemed to draw her toward Jack. And when he finally looked her way, their eyes locked for the briefest moment, and Maggie felt the world shift around her. They didn't speak at first. Instead, Jack walked over and simply held out his hand. There were no words, no grand gesture, just the invitation for her to join him. Maggie, without hesitation, placed her hand in his, and they moved onto the dance floor. The music seemed to fade as they moved together, the rhythm of their steps sinking in a way that felt both familiar and new. As they danced, Maggie realized she didn't need to say anything. The connection between them spoke louder than any words could. For the rest of the evening, Jack and Maggie remained inseparable. They talked about everything and nothing. They shared stories of their childhood, their hopes, and their dreams. Maggie found herself laughing in a way she hadn't in years, her heart light and free. Jack, too, seemed to come alive in her presence. There was a vulnerability to him that Maggie had never expected. He wasn't just the cowboy everyone admired from a distance. He was a man with a past, a man who had been shaped by his experiences. But just as quickly as the night had begun, it came to an end. The music slowed, and the town dance wound down. As the crowd began to disperse, Jack took Maggie's hand one last time and walked her to the edge of the dance floor. "You're not like the others," Jack said, his voice low and steady. Maggie smiled. "Neither are you," she replied. They stood there for a moment, the night air cool against their skin. There was a silence between them, the kind that felt full of meaning. But before Maggie could say anything else, Jack spoke again. "I'll be leaving town soon," he said quietly. Maggie felt her heart sink at the words, though she tried to mask it. She hadn't expected anything to last. It was just one night. After all, one perfect, unforgettable night. But deep down, a part of her wished it could have been different. "Will I see you again?" she asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Jack nodded. But Jack never did come back. As the days turned into weeks, and then months, Maggie's hope began to fade. She continued with her life, working the land, helping her family, and eventually marrying a man from town. She tried to move on, to forget the cowboy who had captured her heart. But no matter how hard she tried, Jack never left her mind. She often found herself staring out at the horizon, wondering where he was, what he was doing, and if he ever thought of her. Years passed, and Maggie's life changed in ways she hadn't expected. She became a mother, raising children who grew up in the same town where she had once fallen in love. Her marriage, while steady, was no longer the passionate union it had once been. There were moments of joy, of course, but the spark that had once driven her had begun to fade. It was hard to explain, but Maggie knew something was missing in her life. It wasn't that she was unhappy. It was just that she hadn't felt truly alive in a long time. And so, life went on. Maggie continued to live in the town, surrounded by familiar faces, raising her children, and doing what she had always done. But there were nights, quiet nights, when she was alone, when her thoughts would drift back to that summer evening, the night she had danced with Jack. She wondered where he had gone, and if he ever thought of her. Would he remember her if they crossed paths again? It was a question she had asked herself for years, but she never found an answer. Instead, she tucked the memories of Jack away, safely stored in the back of her heart, believing that some things are better left in the past. After all, life had moved on, and Maggie had moved on too. Or so she thought. Little did Maggie know, the past was about to come rushing back into her life in a way she never could have imagined. The quiet life Maggie had built over the years was about to be disrupted in a way she hadn't seen coming. It was an ordinary morning when the first sign of change arrived. The sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the small town where Maggie had spent most of her life. She was finishing up her chores, walking along the dirt road that led from her house to the market, when she saw him. At first, Maggie thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. Could it really be him? After all these years? She stood still for a moment, watching the man walking toward her, his figure outlined by the early morning light. There was no mistaking it. Jack Thornton was back. He looked different, but the change wasn't something dramatic. It was more in the way he carried himself. He was still the same man she remembered, tall, with broad shoulders and a presence that demanded attention. But there was something new in the way he walked. There was an air of calm confidence about him, a quiet strength that made it clear that the boy she had once known was long gone. This man had lived a life. He had seen things, experienced things, and grown in ways that Maggie could never have imagined. But in that moment, all Maggie could focus on was the fact that he was standing in front of her, after all this time. Jack stopped a few feet away from her, and for a moment, neither of them said a word. Maggie's heart was racing, her mind spinning. She wasn't sure whether she wanted to run up to him and embrace him or simply turn around and walk away. There were so many questions she wanted to ask him, so many feelings she had buried deep inside for all these years. But at the same time, the uncertainty of his return made her cautious. He broke the silence first, his voice as steady and calm as ever. "Maggie." It was all he said, but the way he said her name, soft, almost like a prayer, was enough to stir something deep inside her. She nodded, swallowing the lump that had formed in her throat. "Jack," she replied, her voice a little shaky, though she tried to mask it. "I didn't expect to see you again." "I didn't expect to come back," Jack admitted, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. "But here I am." They stood there for a moment longer, both of them unsure of what to say next. The years between them felt vast, and yet the connection they shared seemed as if it had never left. Maggie had to remind herself that it had been 20 years since that night at the town dance. 20 years since Jack had disappeared without a trace. What happened? Maggie finally managed to ask, her curiosity getting the best of her. "Why did you leave without saying goodbye? Why? 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 Why did you leave without saying goodbye?" Jack's expression softened, and for the first time, Maggie saw the pain in his eyes. "I had my reasons," he said quietly, his voice filled with an unspoken sadness. "I needed to leave. There were things I had to do, things I had to figure out." Maggie felt her heart ache as she listened to him. She wanted to ask more, to push him to tell her everything, but she could tell that this wasn't something Jack was ready to share just yet. She could see that he had changed, that whatever he had gone through had shaped him into someone different, someone more guarded, more private. But even with all the years that had passed, Maggie couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. She had moved on with her life, married another man, and had children. But Jack, he was the one she had never truly forgotten. And now, here he was again, standing in front of her as if no time had passed. It was as if fate had conspired to bring them back together, though neither of them had asked for it. "I didn't mean to stir up old feelings," Jack continued, his voice a little more hesitant now. "But I couldn't stay away. I've spent years thinking about this place, about you, and I knew I had to come back." Maggie's breath caught in her chest. "You've thought about me?" "Of course I have," Jack said, his gaze softening. "I never stopped thinking about you, Maggie. Not for one moment." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Maggie could feel the walls she had built around her heart start to crumble, piece by piece. She had told herself for so long that she was fine, that she had moved on. But now, standing here with Jack, she realized just how much she had buried. For a moment, they simply stood there, in the middle of the road, letting the weight of the past settle over them. Maggie didn't know what to say, or what to do. The life she had built with her family, with her husband, seemed distant now, like a story she had once told herself to explain who she had become. She had been so focused on moving forward that she had forgotten what it felt like to look back. Finally, Jack spoke again, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I know it's complicated, Maggie. I know it won't be easy. But I need to be honest with you. I've come back because I still care about you. And I think you still care about me. I mean day. Maggie's heart raced in her chest. She didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to run, to turn away from him and the flood of emotions he was awakening. But another part of her, one that she had kept buried for so long, wanted to reach out to him, to see if they could rekindle what had once been so special. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice quiet. "My life is here, Jack. I have a family. Things are complicated." "I understand," Jack said, his tone gentle but firm. "I don't want to cause trouble in your life. I just needed to see you again, to talk to you." Maggie nodded, her thoughts swirling. She didn't know what Jack's return meant, but she knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. As Jack turned to leave, he paused and glanced back at her. "I'll be around," he said simply. "Whenever you're ready to talk, I'll be here." And with that, he walked away, disappearing into the distance as quickly as he had appeared. Maggie stood there for a long time, unable to move. Her mind was racing with questions, emotions, and memories of a time long past. But she knew one thing. The man she had loved so many years ago was back in her life, and whether she was ready for it or not, things were about to change. The question now was, could she let go of the life she had built and face the possibility of a future with Jack, or would she continue to live with the choices she had made, never knowing what could have been? The answers, it seemed, were far from clear. But for the first time, in a long time, Maggie felt the spark of something new, something alive, stirring deep within her once again. Maggie's mind was a whirlwind after Jack's sudden return. The quiet life she had built, with its predictable rhythms and familiar routines, was suddenly upended. She had spent so many years focusing on her family and responsibilities that she had nearly forgotten the wild, free feelings of youth. Jack's reappearance brought those feelings rushing back in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. It was as though time had rewound, and she was once again standing at that crossroads in her life, unsure of which path to take. The next few days passed in a blur for Maggie. She went about her usual tasks, but her mind was elsewhere. Her husband, Frank, noticed the change, but he didn't say anything. He had always been a man of few words, and their relationship had become more about shared duties and less about shared dreams. There were no fiery conversations, no late-night talks about hopes for the future. It was a comfortable routine, but it lacked something. And now, with Jack back in town, Maggie began to wonder if that something was a part of her life that she had buried long ago. She spent more time than usual walking through town, hoping for another chance encounter with Jack. She told herself she was just being nostalgic, remembering the man she once loved. But every time she saw him working at the ranch, talking to the other townspeople, or just riding his horse through the fields, her heart skipped a beat. There was something in the way he moved, in the way he interacted with the world, that reminded her of a time when everything felt more alive. Maggie hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected Jack to come back into her life after all these years, nor had she expected the emotions to come rushing back so quickly. She had assumed that the life she had with Frank was all she needed. But now, standing at the edge of this new chapter with Jack, Maggie realized she didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what she wanted. One evening, after the sun had set and the world outside was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, Maggie found herself standing by the old oak tree near the edge of town. It was a place she had gone to many times over the years, whenever she needed to think. The wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment, everything felt still, as if the world was waiting for her to make a decision. She heard the sound of hooves approaching, and when she turned, she saw Jack riding toward her on his horse. He stopped a few feet away from her, tipping his hat in greeting. "You've been hard to find," he said, his voice warm and familiar, like the comforting sound of a summer breeze. Maggie smiled softly. "I've been keeping busy," she replied. "Life's been full." Jack dismounted, his movements graceful and sure. He stood there for a moment, his eyes searching hers, as if he could see all the things Maggie was hiding: her confusion, her longing, the part of her that had never truly let go. She felt exposed under his gaze, and yet she didn't want him to look away. There was something in those eyes, something she hadn't seen in a long time, a depth of understanding that made her feel like she could finally speak her truth. "I never stopped thinking about you, Maggie," Jack said, his voice low. "I know I didn't leave in the best way, but I had to go. I had to find myself. And now, I realize that what I've been looking for has been here all along." Maggie's heart tightened. She had spent so many years wondering why Jack had left without a word, without a trace. And now, here he was, standing in front of her, explaining his absence in a way that made her understand, but also made her question everything. What had she really built for herself all these years? Was it enough? I know things are complicated, Maggie, Jack continued, his gaze never leaving hers. I know you've built a life here, and I'm not trying to come in and disrupt it. But I need you to know that I came back for a reason. I came back because I've never stopped loving you. Maggie felt a lump rise in her throat. She wanted to say something, but the words stuck. She didn't know what to feel anymore. Her life with Frank had its own comfort, its own kind of love, even if it wasn't the kind she had once dreamed of. And then there was Jack, a man who had been a part of her past, but never truly left her heart. What was she supposed to do with these feelings now? Was it fair to her family to even entertain the idea of another life? I don't know what to say, Maggie said finally, her voice trembling slightly. This is all so sudden. I never thought I'd see you again. I didn't expect to come back either, Jack replied, his voice softening. But when I did, I realized that I was running from something I shouldn't have been running from. I'm not asking you to make a decision right now, Maggie. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm willing to take things slow. I'm willing to prove that the man I am now is someone you could trust. Maggie didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to untangle the web of emotions that had been spun inside her. But as she stood there, looking at Jack, she realized that for the first time in years, she felt alive in a way that she hadn't expected. There was something about the way Jack looked at her. Something about the way he spoke that made her feel seen, understood, and valued. I don't know if I can do this, Maggie whispered, more to herself than to Jack. I don't know if I can walk away from the life I've built. Jack reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. His touch was warm, reassuring. I'm not asking you to walk away from anything, Maggie. I'm asking you to consider what you really want. What would make you happy? Maggie looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent so long living for others, her family, her community, that she had forgotten what it was like to think about herself. She had forgotten what it was like to dream about her own happiness, her own future. But Jack was giving her a chance to rediscover that. To rediscover herself. I can't promise anything, Maggie said, her voice shaky but determined. But I'll think about it. I'll think about what you said. Jack nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. That's all I ask. No pressure. Just think about it. As he mounted his horse and rode away, Maggie stood there for a long time, her thoughts swirling. She didn't know what would happen next, or what the future held for her. But for the first time in years, she felt a sense of possibility. The kind of possibility she had buried long ago. She didn't have all the answers, but maybe, just maybe, she was ready to start looking for them. The path ahead was uncertain, but it felt like it was hers to choose. And that was a feeling Maggie hadn't had in a long time. As the days stretched on, Maggie's world seemed to be slowly shifting beneath her feet. It wasn't something she had anticipated, but there was no denying that Jack's return had stirred something deep inside her. It was a feeling she couldn't ignore. A feeling that made her question everything she thought she knew about herself and the life she had built. At first, she had tried to push it all aside, focusing on her family, her responsibilities, and the comfort of the life she had worked so hard to create. But no matter how many times she told herself that everything was fine, that her life with Frank was enough, the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. She kept finding herself looking for Jack, hoping to run into him at the local market or while she was walking through town. She didn't even know what she wanted when she saw him, but each time their paths crossed, it was like a small spark reignited in her heart. Maggie hadn't realized just how much of herself she had buried until Jack came back. She had gotten so used to being the wife, the mother, the woman who took care of everything, that she had forgotten the person she had been before all of that. The young woman who had once fallen deeply in love. The woman who had dreams and desires that went beyond the daily grind of life. And now, standing at this crossroads, Maggie was forced to confront all of that. The tension between her and Jack had been growing. They had talked, yes, but there was always an unspoken weight between them, an understanding that things couldn't simply return to how they had been. Too much time had passed, and both of them had changed. Jack had lived a life full of experiences that had shaped him into someone completely different from the young cowboy she had once known. And Maggie had built a life that, for all its comforts, no longer made her feel truly alive. It wasn't just Jack's return that was causing Maggie's confusion. It was everything that came with it. The life she had with Frank, while stable, was becoming more and more suffocating. She had married Frank because he was a good man, someone who could provide for her and their family. But over the years, their relationship had become more of a partnership based on mutual respect than passion. The connection they had once shared had faded, replaced by routine and responsibility. Frank had noticed the change in her. He was quiet, but he was observant. Maggie couldn't hide it from him. She found herself distracted, often lost in thought when she should have been present. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Frank looked at her with concern in his eyes. "Maggie," he began softly, "I know something's been bothering you lately. You haven't been yourself. Is there something you want to talk about?" Maggie felt a pang of guilt in her chest. She had always prided herself on being honest with Frank, but now, everything seemed so complicated. How could she explain to him what was going on in her heart? How could she tell him that Jack, the man she had loved so many years ago, had come back into her life, and that she was struggling to ignore the pull she still felt for him? "I'm fine, Frank," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "It's just work, you know. Just a lot on my mind." Frank didn't press her further, but Maggie could tell he didn't fully believe her. He wasn't a man who liked to confront difficult emotions, but he was sharp, and he knew her better than anyone. Still, she couldn't bring herself to open up to him about the whirlwind of emotions she was experiencing. How could she possibly explain it? She wasn't sure she even understood it herself. In the days that followed, Maggie found herself spending more time thinking about Jack. He had been kind and patient, never pushing her to make a decision, but she could feel his presence in her life, like a quiet storm just waiting to break. Every time they talked, she found herself drawn to him, his words carrying weight and meaning. He had a way of making her feel like she mattered, like her thoughts and feelings were important. With Frank, she had grown accustomed to being a part of the background, someone who held everything together but didn't always get the attention or recognition she craved. One afternoon, Maggie decided to visit the old oak tree again, the place where she had met Jack on that fateful evening. It had become her refuge, a place where she could think clearly without the distractions of her busy life. As she walked along the familiar path, she saw him again, Jack, sitting on a nearby rock, his eyes scanning the horizon. There was something peaceful about the way he looked, as if he had found a sense of contentment that Maggie couldn't quite grasp. When Jack saw her, he stood up, his face breaking into a smile. "I was hoping you'd come by," he said, his voice as steady as always. Maggie smiled back, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I needed to think," she said softly, feeling the weight of the situation settle on her shoulders. Jack nodded, sensing her unease. "I know this isn't easy, Maggie. I don't want to rush you or make things harder. I just want you to know that I'm here, no matter what you decide." The simplicity of his words hit Maggie harder than she expected. Here was a man who had come back after 20 years, ready to build something new, something real. And here she was, torn between the life she had and the life she could have. It wasn't just about Jack anymore. It was about her, about what she wanted, what she needed, and what she was willing to risk for it. She took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs. "I don't know if I can do this," she said quietly. "I don't know if I can leave everything I've built behind. Frank, the kids, this town, it's all I've known." Jack stepped closer. his presence warm and reassuring. "I'm not asking you to leave everything behind, Maggie. I'm asking you to think about what makes you happy, what you need, what you deserve." Maggie felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so much of her life putting others first, putting her family's needs above her own. She had forgotten what it felt like to dream for herself, to imagine a future that was all her own. But standing there, with Jack's quiet support, she began to realize that maybe she had been living for everyone else for too long. Maybe it was time to start living for herself. "I don't know what I want yet," Maggie whispered, more to herself than to Jack. "But I can't keep pretending like I have all the answers." Jack didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He simply reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder, a gesture that spoke louder than any words could. In that moment, Maggie knew that the decision she had to make wasn't about Jack or Frank, it was about her. It was about finding the courage to choose her own path, to stop living for everyone else's expectations. As Jack turned to leave, he glanced over his shoulder. Maggie watched him walk away, the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest. But for the first time in years, she felt like she was finally starting to see clearly. The road ahead wasn't easy, and she didn't have all the answers. But for the first time, in a long time, she felt ready to begin the journey of finding herself again. It wasn't going to be simple or straightforward. But Maggie knew one thing for sure. She had to face the truth about what she wanted, no matter how difficult it might be. And maybe, just maybe, that truth would lead her to the life she had always dreamed of. The days after Maggie's conversation with Jack felt like they were stretching out before her, long and uncertain, but somehow full of promise. For the first time in years, Maggie found herself thinking about what she truly wanted from life. Not what was expected of her, not what others needed, but what would make her feel complete. It was a strange feeling, one that both excited and terrified her. She had always been the woman who put others first. Her family, her town, her community. But now, she had to face the fact that her heart longed for something more, something different. The choice she faced wasn't simple. On one side was Frank, the man she had been with for many years, the father of her children, the stable presence in her life. Frank had never been unkind to her. He had worked hard, provided for their family, and kept things steady. But somewhere along the way, they had lost the spark, the deep connection that once brought them together. They had become more like roommates than a married couple, partners who shared responsibilities but no longer shared their hearts in the way they once had. Then there was Jack, the man who had captured her heart all those years ago and had returned when she least expected it. He was different now, but still the same in many ways. There was a depth to him that Maggie couldn't ignore. He had lived a life full of experiences and challenges, and yet his return to town had stirred up feelings in her that she thought she had buried forever. Jack had never pressured her to make a decision. He had simply offered her his presence, his understanding, and his willingness to take things slowly. But the fact that he was back in her life, in this way, meant that Maggie had to reckon with her own desires and dreams. Maggie had spent countless hours in quiet reflection, often walking through the fields near her home, trying to sort through the emotions that had been stirring in her. Each time she looked up, she could see the life she had built with Frank, the house they had raised their children in, the stable routine they had followed. But alongside that, she also saw the life she could have with Jack, a life filled with new possibilities, with excitement, and with the kind of love that made her feel alive again. It wasn't just about Jack and Frank, though. It was about Maggie herself. She realized that she had spent so many years focusing on what everyone else needed, that she had lost sight of her own needs, her own happiness. She had let her identity become tied to the roles she played: wife, mother, neighbor, rather than who she truly was at her core. She had spent too many years thinking she had to be everything to everyone. And now, it was time to think about what she wanted, what would make her feel whole again. Maggie knew that her decision wasn't just about love, but about her own personal growth. She needed to find the courage to follow her heart, even if it meant making difficult choices. Her family, her children, her town, they would all have to adjust. But Maggie realized that she had been holding herself back, afraid to pursue the life she really wanted. It was as if she had been waiting for permission to choose happiness. But now, she understood that the only permission she needed was her own. One evening, after another long day spent in deep thought, Maggie decided that it was time. She had to face the truth. She couldn't live in the limbo any longer. She owed it to herself and to the people she loved to make a choice. As the sun set behind the hills, casting a soft, golden light over the land, Maggie found herself walking once again to the old oak tree where she had spoken to Jack weeks before. When she arrived, Jack was already there, waiting for her. He wasn't on his horse this time, nor was he standing in front of her with a smile that made her heart race. Instead, he was sitting on a low rock, looking out at the horizon, lost in thought. There was something about the way he looked quiet and contemplative that made Maggie's heart soften. She had spent so much time thinking about him, about their past, and what the future could hold, that she hadn't realized how much she had missed his presence in her life. Jack turned when he heard her footsteps, his eyes meeting hers. There was no need for words at first. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with understanding. Maggie felt the weight of everything she had been thinking, everything she had been feeling, suddenly come to a head. She had made her decision. "I've spent so many years living for everyone else," she began softly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "For my family, for my husband, for this town, I've forgotten what it feels like to think about what I need, what I want." Jack nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. He didn't say anything at first, allowing her the space to continue. "I've realized something," Maggie said, taking a deep breath. "I've been afraid to choose happiness, to choose what's best for me. I thought I had to make everyone else happy first. But I can't keep doing that. I need to live for myself, to figure out what I want. And I think I'm ready to do that now." Jack stood up slowly, his expression softening. "Maggie, I'm not asking you to leave your life behind. I'm asking you to think about your future. Whatever that looks like, I'll be here, supporting you." Maggie's heart swelled with gratitude. She had always feared that choosing her own happiness would be selfish, that it would hurt the people she loved. But now, standing here with Jack, she understood that it wasn't selfish to want to be happy, it was essential. "I don't know what the future holds," Maggie said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I know that I want to take a chance. I want to see what life could be like, to be honest with myself about what I need. And for the first time in a long time, I feel ready." Jack smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile. "That's all I've ever wanted for you, Maggie. To find what makes you happy." Maggie felt a weight lift off her shoulders, as if a door she had been holding closed for years was finally opened. She wasn't sure what would happen next. She didn't know if she was making the right choice or if it would lead to heartbreak. But she knew that she had made the choice that felt true to her heart. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of pink and purple, Maggie and Jack stood there together, side by side. There was no rush, no need for immediate answers. For the first time in a long time, Maggie felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead was uncertain, but she knew it was hers to choose. She had stepped into a new chapter of her life, a chapter where she would no longer hide behind the expectations of others but would live for herself, with the courage to embrace whatever came next. And whatever that was, she knew that she wouldn't be alone. Jack was there, and for the first time in years, Maggie believed that the future held something beautiful, something worth waiting for.